The Brooks article that you sent us that asks us to think about really effective leaders based on David Brooks' column is particularly interesting to me. And I chose to look at it in one way. I didn't think about, presidents, senators, governors, although I could have talked about George Voinovich, a governor that Doug, you and I know very well. I thought about past chairs that my organization has had. And I must tell you, I am partial to the female chairs that we've had at the International Economic Development Council. And I want to make note of three of them. I was very fortunate to have worked with Ioana Morfesis, who headed up the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, April Young, who headed up the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, and Robin Roberts-Krieger, who worked at the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. And as I thought about their leadership styles, I first thought about what did they do? What did they help me accomplish as a CEO of the International Economic Development Council? In the case of April Young, she helped me nearly double the dues of this organization. We were stuck, we were financially stagnant, and we did not have a system that necessarily worked. And using her leadership skills, she helped me achieve that. Robin Roberts-Krieger helped me when we had some accounting flaws coming out of our accounting department. It could have destroyed this organization, and she helped me deal with the board straight on, and Ioana helped us take us to the next level. But I don't want to limit it to their achievements. I want to talk to you about how they achieved this. And like the leadership skills that David Brooks talked about, theirs were slightly different. One, and maybe it was because they're women, they were able to show a great deal of empathy to the issue and to the people making those changes. Two, they helped with the role setting, both between what their role was as leaders and what my role was. And third, they each had a unique leadership style that in many cases was much more different than some of the men that I have worked with. And trust me, over the 29 years, I've worked with actually far more men than I have these three women. But as I read the article from David Brooks and thought about what those characteristics that Lincoln had, these women could have probably stepped into the White House and carried on things in very successful ways. Now, Michelle, being a woman leader, maybe you can comment on some of these things.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I think that's a very interesting observation, and I agree with what you are sharing about women in leadership. Like you, I took a different perspective after reading the David Brooks article, and as I reflected on our conversation today, I wanted to relate it to something in mainstream, so I really focused more on a pop culture, real-life example. As I think about leadership, I think about the next generation in pop culture, I wanted to understand who's out there paving the way as it relates to women in leadership and leadership in general, and how to align it back to the David Brooks article. And I stumbled across a 25-year-old female who is the highest paid woman in the music industry. She has taken on major corporations such as Spotify and most recently Apple, which appeared in the news today. She has embraced corporate sponsorship, and she secured several dozen trademarks, has a very smart business acumen and vision, and has a very strong brand in social media with over 53.4 million Twitter followers and 70.4.6 million Facebook followers, and that would be Taylor Swift. She is a very productive brand, never forgetting her audience. She gets paid for her music, her product, and having a huge impact on her fans, and is totally revolutionizing the music industry. And as I thought about the Brooks article, he states that Lincoln had a fundamental vision, a golden temperament, and a shrewd strategy for how to cope with political realities of the moment. And we definitely understand that in today's society, some of the political realities that one must face in the music industry, and to be 24 years old and show such strong leadership, I think is very insightful, because not only is she accomplishing leadership in helping her individual self advance, she's bringing other artists along with her. And so as I think about the essential skills for a leader in the 21st century, similar to you, Jeff, female leaders contribute a sense of uniqueness. They have an original perspective that inspires people. They act effectively, and this could be applied to all leaders, whether you're male or female. Act effectively, have a vision, formulate your vision, and set priorities. Resiliency is key. Believing in your abilities. Lincoln had a radical sense of self-honesty. He was a man of great pride and integrity, and so, clearly that is a correlation there. Embracing change and new opportunities, with Taylor Swift taking on Apple, which is a $700 billion corporation, and for it in today's media reversing a decision around paying royalties to artists, I think is pretty significant and groundbreaking. But most important, as I mentioned about Lincoln, having a sense of staying grounded, a sense of humility, and keeping the meaning of your work at the front and center. I think it takes courage, and it also takes personal risk for the greater good. In preparation for our discussion, I did a little research. I did a little research on Lincoln, so it was really fitting that you mentioned the publication Team of Rivals. It's obviously one that I was aware of, and one that I considered in preparation for our conversation. And what I learned through that process was there is a general, General B. McClellan, commander of the Army of the Potomac, and eventually the first general-in-chief in the Union Army under President Lincoln. And he actually was released by President Lincoln because of the character flaws that he exhibited that caused others to lose confidence in him, and the lack of productivity and inefficiency and lack of judgment and alignment. And I found that to be very interesting, with Lincoln being such a humble leader, a leader that provided opportunity and chance, and had as I mentioned earlier, a self-honesty about him. So I didn't want to attribute this segment to any one person, but really wanted to understand exactly what those flaws are and how they would relate to a situation that I have encountered in my career. And the leadership flaws that I learned to be detrimental, or I consider to be detrimental, are poor judgment, decisions that are not made in the organization's best interest, but yet in the best interest of a particular individual. Another leadership flaw is, complaining about resources without looking for opportunity and solutions. Another would be refusing to, take responsibility for actions, and also learning from mistakes. I strongly believe that we should be perpetual students, and self-growth and development is fundamental to humility and strong leadership, and I see this flaw in certain business situations that I encounter. And lastly, I would suggest, engaging in acts of insubordination. So how I relate this back to a real-life situation is that there was a young leader that I had the opportunity to work with, and I would say this person had no filter. had in the tone of this particular individual was very much disrespectful, very much egotistical and arrogant. And so when approached with a development plan with an opportunity to help the individual understand that there is a need for professional growth, self-awareness, there was no responsibility taken. It was very much deflected back on others and what they're doing to contribute to the issue rather than a self-assessment of what am I doing to fundamentally contribute to this particular case. So I would say in general it's very important for leaders to have a level of self-awareness and ownership in order to learn from their flaws and their behaviors, and most importantly, understand how their actions impact others. And there's a phrase that I've heard used many times, and I use that when I work with teams, and that is be very careful about your intent and impact. So with that said, I know Jeff will be very insightful in helping us understand what he thinks as well.
So thank you, Michelle. This question that has been asked of us is a very difficult question for me. And I have, like you, experienced firsthand people who were trying to lead or had leadership roles and had significant character flaws. And as much as you wanted to help them, as much as you wanted to guide them, excuse them, these flaws just would fly in so badly that it was hard to work with them. I will, I'm going to, as I told Doug at the beginning of this, I'm going to avoid using names, but when I was at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, we were there during a time that there ended up being a major scandal. And the scandal had people taking things from people that didn't belong to them. We had a deputy assistant secretary. I could probably use his name because it's on the record and he was convicted, but I won't. But he had no compunction about taking trips for he and his family to Caribbean islands at the expense of consultants who did work with HUD. He had assistance from developers with the down payment on his house. I mean, one would just say he down and out he was a crook. But that's the extreme measure. I think at the end of the day, when I look at some of these character flaws, I tend to put them into one category, and sometimes it is just an ego so out of control that they are blinded by their own self-importance, and they are also blinds their decision-making that allows them to think they can get away with things that they probably shouldn't. We've had some experiences, and we have a very disciplined ethics policy at this organization. We have had economic development leaders take things that didn't belong to them in ways not dissimilar to what I just described at HUD. We've had allegations and instances of sexual harassment that were really difficult to think that some of my peers could actually be engaged in that type of behavior. And frankly, at the time we built our ethics policy, I was hoping, and maybe quite naive, that we wouldn't have to use it all that often. But frankly, now that we have it built and developed, I'm so glad it's there. Because it allows us to look at some of our leaders and say, the emperor wears no clothes. And not only is the emperor wearing those clothes, they shouldn't be the emperor. And it has been an eye-opening experience for me, and it is one that it does set me back from time to time and say, how did these people become leaders in the first place? Thank you, Doug. I think there are three things or three areas of growth that I have had the opportunity to learn as I honed my leadership skills for what they are. And it has been a great deal of watching others and how they were successful or why they weren't successful. And the first leader that I affectionately look to, and particularly since Father's Day was not that long ago, it was my own father. And the leadership skill that he showed me was twofold. One, show up to work day in and day out, and whether you have a cold or not, show up day in or day out and give 110%. My father left the house at 6:45 every morning, and he returned home at 5:30 every day. He worked a 10-hour day, and he worked over 30 years for Westinghouse Electric, and there was nothing about him that shortchanged that organization. And as I told you and Michelle at the beginning of this, believe it or not, I'm going to have my 29th anniversary here in a month, and I can't believe it. And so to a certain degree, I followed in his shoes and working hard for one organization. And that is not everybody's going to do that. People are going to change jobs. They're going to change organizations. They may change cities. I just happen to follow in the footsteps of my father. Second, I did talk in our second section about people who took things from where they shouldn't have. And I had the opportunity, I had a mentor. And my mentor got me summer jobs. He was on my paper route as a young man. And lo and behold, I found that he got arrested. And this guy was brilliant. He was a vice president of a company. And he frankly fudged his expense reports. And he fudged enough of them that it became real money. And I learned from him, not that I was thinking that I was going to follow in his footsteps, but I learned how important it was, integrity above all. And, that is a skill that I've learned. It's also part of my makeup. It's part of my religious background. It's a part of the way I was raised. But it's also something that if you're not careful, you can move yourself outside of the white lines from time to time, and the experience of watching him, somebody who at a point in time I thought he was like a god, and they fired him. He had one of the bigger houses in my hometown. This guy I thought was the equivalent of a rock star, and he came tumbling down. He recovered. But that was an important lesson, and finally, I learned that keeping your ego in check is extremely important. And maybe I'm lucky in that I'm somewhat of an introvert, and so I'm not going to be necessarily the first one to speak up. I'm not. You could argue to the contrary, Doug, but I'm not going to talk to hear myself talk. And as a result, keeping a sense of who I am and my importance or lack thereof, I hopefully keep in check. And those are lessons that I've learned that hopefully have been helpful to me along the line. Michelle, I'm sure you have entirely different experiences, and maybe you can share yours.
Thanks, Jeff. Very, very interesting insights. Definitely lessons that we all can learn from. And like you, I have a family example of a leader in my life, which would be my mother. And, I too learn through observation and believe that I have several of my leadership qualities from her. She is definitely a humble leader. She's very tenacious, but she definitely believes in servant leadership and supporting and helping others. And so I'm very fortunate to have her as a role model in my life. From a business perspective, professional perspective, I have had great fortune to work with some of the best leaders in the association community, and I will say that several have mentored me throughout my career and continue to do so today. What I looked for as I was rising and growing in in the profession is you look for leaders internal to the organizations where I worked. So I've had great fortune to work with the best and the brightest, such as Susan Sarfati and John Graham and Paul Borowski, who have helped me develop characteristics that I hopefully embody today. I truly realize that I'll never have all the answers, but through resourcefulness and through certain characteristics, I can certainly work to identify solutions. And some of those characteristics that I continue to work on today is how to be a better listener. How can I, and now that I am in the role at Association Forum, it is important that I embody this characteristic and work with the team to help it reach its full potential. And with that, focus on the team, focus on developing my team. You're only as good as your team, and I now realize how true that is and have made a conscious effort to develop the leadership skill more based on my experiences, and always be a perpetual student, a perpetual learner, always willing to embrace change, to look for new opportunities, but also encourage my team to do that as well. And lately I've been thinking about this whole concept of authentic leadership, candor as it relates to growing and developing a team when confronted these days with so much access to information, different choices and models and decisions to be made. How can you maintain a level of authenticity while growing and leading an organization? So, with that, in summary, I'm always developing my skills based on my past experiences, looking to the future with great optimism.